Hunter, do you have any travel plans this summer? And if so, where are you going?
I do have travel plans this summer. In about a week, I'm heading up to Seattle area where I have relatives.
Okay.
My wife's family and our nephews are graduating from high school, so there's going to be a celebration of that fantastic achievement.
I'm really glad you brought up high school and that you have some relatives who are graduating or entering
Yes.
summer vacation, summer break for themselves, because that's going to play a little bit of a role in the episode later today.
Oh, good. Well, we did not plan this, listener. This is just organically came about here. So we've got that trip, and then we're going to the East Coast, Connecticut, and New York to visit family there. So yeah, that's the main part of that's what summer vacation looks like this year. What about you?
Well, I'll get to myself in just a second, but this is also hitting on another thing that we're going to talk about, and that one aspect of your summer travel plans are going to be a road trip. I'm assuming you're not going to fly up to Seattle. Some people do, but
no, that's
drive.
A road trip for sure. Yeah,
a little bit of a road trip in there, and then I'm assuming that when you go to Connecticut, you're going to fly. You're not going to drive.
We are
correct?
Flying. Yes. Yeah.
So you're also
we have to rent a vehicle for part of that trip.
Yeah, you're also tackling two of the primary methods that people experience summer vacation travel. So we're going to talk about that a little bit as well.
A lot of foreshadowing here.
A lot of foreshadowing. So as far as myself, I don't really have any travel plans. I just got back from Boston for a thing, but I guess that was still spring. So I don't know if we can factor that into summer travel plans. But that was just for some family stuff. I don't usually travel during summer because, one, I don't have kids, so I can basically travel year round without having to interrupt a school schedule, which is a privilege that I currently have.
Right.
And two, it's so dang nice here in Portland. Why would I want to? And it's not very nice the rest of the year. Why would I want to leave Portland when it's nice?
It's a good time to be here. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And if you can travel throughout the year, then you don't have to use summer necessarily as your main vacation time.
I will say that I have plans in October to go to Costa Rica for a few weeks. So that'll be my, I guess not summer travel, but my vacation, the closest I have to a summer vacation.
fall vacation.
So listener, we are talking all about your summer vacation, our summer vacation, everybody's summer vacation today on the podcast. And we're going to talk about that mostly because, well, we're recording this today on June 21st. It is officially summer, which means that at least across the United States and probably Canada, most kids are out of school. I'm not sure if that's the case for the rest of the world. I know different places do things a little bit differently. In fact, I did look this up a little bit and I saw that most places have some form of a break, but they can be as short as 4 weeks all the way up to here in the US, which is like 2.5 months, 3 months, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And because kids are out of school and the weather is generally warm, it means that people tend to travel more often during these months. And we have some statistics to back that up. That's not me just saying, I think that's probably what happens. But we'll get to that in a little bit. But also, we're going to talk about it because the whole idea of a summer vacation, has really led to a lot of impacts around the world, right? So we've talked about this in some other episodes, such as our air travel episode. But given the current economics and transportation technologies available today, people are able to travel much farther, much wider than they ever have in the history of human beings. So,
that's for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely, right? How can it not be? Nobody, 100 years ago, people weren't flying across the Atlantic Ocean. They were still, not 100 years ago. No, maybe like 60 years ago is when they started doing that. Something
like that. Yeah, that's right. It just became a little bit more common. So anyways, check out the air travel episode. Learn all about it.
Yeah, we'll probably do another call out for that one here in a little bit. So Hunter, this is going to seem like a silly question. We kind of already answered it, but let's just get to the heart of it.
Okay.
What is a summer vacation?
Oh, a summer vacation is a trip that you take during the summer? Am I missing something there?
Basically, we always like to just sort of like ask each other the question of like, what is it we're talking about in these episodes? This one seemed a little silly to ask because it's all boiled right there in the name, right? It's a summer vacation. It's a vacation you take during summer. But I kind of just wanted to ask it just to like really like get to the point that that's sort of what we're going to be talking about.
I suppose people,
Thanks.
it's a ritual, right? Because sometimes
Right.
people vacation in the same place every year. And so maybe for some people, it's going to someplace new. For some people, it's revisiting a place, a favorite place.
Right. And it's important to note here, and we're going to talk about this when we get to some statistics later in the episode, but it's important to note here that summer vacation does truly mean summer vacation, in that if you're in Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or any of the countries that are in the southern half of the hemisphere, you're typically taking your vacations in the same time period of, summer for you, right? So this is a trend that we do see elsewhere. So summer vacation for us here, June, July, August, maybe a little bit into September, is not going to be felt the same way as somebody in Australia who's probably going to be looking more at January or December, January, February, maybe
Still
a little bit
summer
March.
Vacation, though. Yeah.
Still summer vacation. Yeah. You still see the trend. Yeah.
Summer vacation also refers to a period of time, as you already alluded to, when students don't go. Most students don't go to class. There's various summer schools and things like that, but that the traditional school year is out for the summer.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, Hunter, you have kids. We already talked about it. When do they start school again?
At the end of August, I believe it is.
Oh, wow. That seems early. Is that always been the case?
Yeah, it's usually like that. There's a bunch of days off in November, no school November, it's sometimes called. But yeah, that's the way that it works out, is the very end of August. So
I've always been very cognizant when I do travel that I always travel after Labor Day.
Right.
Because I think the idea is that once kids go back to school, there's far less travel, right? Families are no longer traveling. And so therefore everything gets a lot cheaper.
Right.
So I would have always assumed that that's when school started again. It's like the day after Labor Day or something like that. I didn't know. I don't have kids myself again.
Some schools probably start in September. At Portland State, we start near the end of September.
Right. Yes. And I do remember that from my days as a college student, that it started late. There's like a big month gap in between.
I think a lot of students, particularly on the East Coast and other places, they start classes at the end of August.
Right.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. And everybody has a different schedule. I guess it depends on your local school district.
Right.
Generally, though, as you said, kids are off in between, sometime between June and into August, maybe into September, generally. So let's go ahead and jump to sort of like a history-ish kind of section now. We're going to talk about the history. How did we get to the idea of summer vacation? It's not something that's been around forever. This is sort of a recent concept.
Yep.
That said, tackling the history, this summer vacation is a concept. It's not really, there's not like a tomb of somebody who's written, a history volume of summer vacation. There's not really any necessarily names that pop up. There's really just a series of events that have happened that have enabled sort of this idea of what we're able to do. Maybe there's a book out there that's sort of obscure. I don't know. I dug a little bit of digging and I sort of cobbled together sort of how we got from point A to point B. So we're just going to do that in sort of this section. We're just going to talk a little about the history of how did we get to the summer vacation.
Let's go.
So, yeah. So, well, I would say as you already shared your summer travel plans, I would say that's a fairly normal experience for most people these days. Obviously, there are different privileges based on income that people have, or based around the world, depending on where you are, that could also influence things. We have a U.S. perspective. Obviously, a lot of people do think about summer vacation to some degree. But if we go back even a little bit in time, it wasn't really all of the case that people would do this. This was sort of new concept, right? In fact, the summer break, that we know today for kids was really more of a practical time off for agricultural duties, right? So
that's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of harvesting. I have a cherry tree outside my house right now, and it's, fully erupting with cherries, right?
We do. Yeah, absolutely.
I just picked a bunch of those cherries yesterday, and it's a lot of work.
It is. I made a cherry picker recently, and it's sort of cobbled together. It works, but yeah, it's labor intensive. Yeah,
very labor intensive. So you can see why. So like that was the whole purpose, right? That's why we have this break. It's kind of weird that kids still get the time off because the vast majority of kids in the United States, at least, are not factored into any sort of agricultural business. In fact, I even read something that a lot of children who are born on farms still don't really participate in the same agricultural activities, right? Because a lot of things have been mechanized. There's just a lot of, the industry is very different today, I guess is what I'll say. I'm not going to dive too deep into that. But we still have it, right? That is still a break. It's time honored. It's set inside our
and that's
system.
why we start late in September at PSU, I think, because young people were needed on the farm up until, like you said, and that's probably changed a lot since the post-war era or something like that. But throughout most of history, families have been farming together. Yeah,
exactly. But Hunter, in the late 1800s and then into the early 1900s, something started happening. Do you have an idea of what that might have been?
Is this an industrialization thing or?
Exactly. Okay. Industrialization. Well, industrialization combined with urbanization, right? So this is sort of the area where people started moving into cities. And once people started moving into cities, one, there was no longer any agricultural work for people who moved into cities. For one, it was very hard. Transportation technologies didn't really allow you to just like zip out, out of town for an hour, right? It was still very rudimentary. So you were basically stuck in the city. And because of that, there was simply no reason for kids to, be working through summer. And so they just sort of had this summer break. At this point in time, there was a lot of child workers in factories. So I want to call that out.
Yep.
So there was that aspect. But with all of this, there was a growing middle class. And with that growing middle class came more wealth. And with more wealth became more sort of what we call leisure travel. Now, of course, if you were nobility, in Europe, for example, or very wealthy prior to sort of this period of time, let's say, going back to the 1500s, 1600s, they likely had experiences that were similar to a summer vacation, right? This is an idea. This is sort of when it's starting to spread beyond this sort of very small class of people.
It was the vast majority get out of the city, right? Like, yeah,
right. Exactly.
We have that
the vast majority of people prior to this time, this sort of late 1800s, early 1900s, did not have anything that came even close to this kind of experience. In fact, at this time, the vast majority of people still didn't, but it was growing, right? This is sort of when this idea was came to be. And this also started to happen at the same time as the expansion of the railway systems across Europe and North America predominantly. Again, there's other places that are experiencing this as well. But with these technologies, travel became even more accessible and affordable. And we have a whole episode all about trains and high-speed rail. You can go check that out to learn more about that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So in England, seaside towns such as Brighton and Blackpool became popular destinations for urban dwellers seeking respite from their busy city life. And similarly, the American elite began flocking to places such as Newport, Rhode Island, and the Catskill Mountains in New York. Recall that during this time, listener, cities were not a great place to be. This was not right.
If you're interested in learning about how difficult it was to live in a city during the period of sort of classic industrialization, pick up any book by Charles Dickens and read the first 3 pages, and you'll get a good appreciation for it was pretty rough going for most people.
They were polluted. They were very dirty. It was just very, and like the living, unless you were, again, very privileged, if you were living in a city, you were probably living in pretty cramped quarters. There wasn't a lot of safety regulations. It was a very rough time to be a city.
Intense sounds, intense smells. Yeah, there was when we look at a picture, we can't appreciate those things, but all the senses were subjected to kinds of things that maybe a lot of people aren't having to deal with now. Maybe some of those things, but
maybe some, but not to the same degree, I would argue. Right. Not to the same amount of people. Coincidentally, a lot of those same cities are now the tourist destinations today, which I think is a bit of a cosmic hilarity right there. So at this point in time, most travel was either based on where the rail was going, right? So very limited, or still via wagons and horse carriages. So it was slow or very specific, right? You were then going to a very specific place, and that's all, or you were going to go in a very slow manner. But one invention would really change things, and that would be the automobile.
Yes.
So Again, we have an episode all about the U.S. automobile industry. Go check it out. Listen all about it. Learn about those. I promise there's going to be a lot of call outs in this episode.
Right. Well, this is just made for that.
Yeah. So the invention and diffusion of the automobile in the early 1900s revolutionized travel and development of the highway system, such as the interstate highway system here in the U.S. in the 1950s. There was other highway systems around the world. Canada had a highway system being built. Mm-hmm. Europe had Germany's very famous Autobahn was already built at this point, or sort of in the early 1900s period, right? These things facilitated this kind of like freedom of travel that the automobile promised at the time. And it also facilitated something called the road trip, certainly something that we call here in the US, which is a very common concept. And Hunter, what's the longest road trip you've ever taken?
The longest road trip I've ever taken is driving across the United States.
From where to where?
From, let's see, Washington, D.C. To San Francisco. Although there were some long stops along the way, but that was part of it.
I mean, you gotta.
That's a cross-country trip. That's a road trip.
My longest was from Los Angeles to Dayton, Ohio, which is kind of an obscure place to visit, but I had some friends living there. And so me and 4 of my buddies, we all packed into a car and decided to go visit our friends out there. And we did it a straight shot. We didn't stay over any place. We just sort of took turns. Yeah. So I don't remember what time it was, but it was a long, long ride. And we were 4 smelly boys doing that. I think we were all like 18 or 19 or something.
Wow.
So anyways, so with the automobile, families could now travel long distances at their own pace. As you had mentioned, you made some stops. You could, sort of see the sights. You could do different things. This led to the popularity of destinations such as national parks and theme parks, right? So national parks, again, we have a whole episode about that. Go check it out. Maybe we'll have a theme parks episode someday. I
think we should.
Yeah. But, national parks sort of came to be sort of in the mid 1800s here in the United States anyways. And while they did have some popularity in the beginning, and, Yellowstone very famously had a train stop that went directly to it, it would really be the automobile that would allow people to fully explore them sort of at their own pace and on their own schedule. So the road trip really became synonymous at this point, sort of the 50s and 60s with the idea of a summer vacation, right? So you have like movies such as Vacation with, who is it? Chevy Chase. Yeah. There you go. Chevy Chase, right? And they're going on a vacation to a theme park, right? And going on this big long road trip. These are very iconic sort of moments. And I think that movie takes place in the 70s or something.
May have been the 80s, but whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Close enough. I'm gonna call a mulligan on that one. All right, let's keep it moving. So as we're hitting this sort of same period of time, the 50s, 60s, 70s, another thing is starting to happen. So the economic prosperity of World War II led to a pretty significant increase in the disposable income and leisure time in the United States. As usual, not for everybody.
That's right.
Broadly, there's still a large amount of people who don't feel that same wealth generation. But this also started to see the birth of the modern tourism industry. And mostly, this is when we start to see the modern birth of the international tourism industry, which today is huge. So commercial airlines began offering affordable-ish flights. And these made international travel more accessible to people everywhere. And this is also when Europe would begin to start to see a surge in American tourists who are eager to visit historic sites and cultural landmarks, particularly around things that had occurred during World War II, which at this point in time, let's say it's the 1970s, that's still relatively recent in memory, right? That's right. 25 years behind, right? You could have a father or a grandfather at this time who is still able to travel and, go and see these things, right? And you can experience that with them. And so this is one of the original impetuses for that migration, that tourist migration movement for Americans specifically, potentially Canadians as well, although I don't have information on that. Countries like Italy, France, and Spain would eventually become hotspots for summer vacations, attracting millions of visitors each year, not just from Americans.
Mediterranean, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, not just from Americans, but also from Northern Europeans and people in the UK. I know Spain and Portugal today are very big, very popular destinations for British people.
That's true.
Yeah, so each of those places attract millions of visitors each year. We're going to get some specific numbers here in a little bit. By the 1960s and 1970s, the concept of the package tour had taken hold. So travel companies like Thomas Cook in the UK and Club Med in France offered all-inclusive vacation packages covering flights, accommodations, and activities. Hunter, this is sort of a foreign concept to me. I don't know if this same idea still exists because I don't know these companies at all. Do you recognize either of these?
Yeah, I remember advertisements for Club Med. And I mean, we still have the equivalent today. It's really a resort type situation.
Okay.
And I mean, also booking tickets for finding deals for flights was a little bit more complicated back then. That's why they had travel agents. Even that was an industry, and people who would help you book trips and hotels and all these kinds of things. Of course, now it's much easier to do that as an individual because of the internet. Yeah, I remember that era.
Yeah, I had read these companies. And I was like, I don't know who these people are.
Yeah, no,
but I think it's
these names
that's
are
faded, right? And so this basically brings us up to today. I said this was going to be a pretty abridged history. It's more of a how did this thing come to be? And this is generally right. We can sort of it's a combination of wealth and transportation technologies that have allowed us to, and to a degree, the internet, as you just pointed out, that have sort of combined to get us to the point where now we have a summer vacation where going to Europe, for example, if I'm here in Portland, I'm going to bop over to Italy for 2 weeks. That's not a foreign concept to a lot of people.
Right.
That's certainly to hear about. Maybe not everybody can afford that, but certainly like most people have heard or have family members who have done something similar. That's a pretty common occurrence relatively.
The nature of the travel was different though before the internet. I mean, you could book ahead and, use a travel guide and call up and make a reservation. But oftentimes you would just roll into a town or a city or someplace and start looking for accommodation. And it wasn't always as pre-planned as it might be today. Of course, there's more people traveling than there ever have been today. So there's a lot more competition for places to stay and this kind of stuff. But it was a little bit, I don't know, spontaneous, a little bit more organic before we had the technologies we have today.
The idea of that sounds very fun, kind of nice, to be honest. It also gives me a lot of anxiety thinking about it.
Yeah. No, it added definitely an anxious twist to travel, but there was some excitement of the unknown instead of sort of kind of knowing exactly what you're going to be doing, which it's not true for everybody. A lot of people just go someplace and show up and check it out. But I think a lot of people really plan pretty heavily now.
Right. Totally. Yeah. Well, there's a lot more we could say about the history. We could sort of go through a lot more in depth, but we're going to have to move on. If you are interested in, learning more about sort of various travel aspects, you can go check out our episodes on national parks, Hawaii, Alaska, and there's so many more. I mean, there's so many episodes that we sort of touch on this in little bits here and there. So
that's right.
Go check those out. But for now, we're going to hit our very first ad break. So we will be right back. And we're back. This is the Geography is Everything podcast. We just ran through a bunch of sort of history of summer vacation. How did we get to this concept? Now we're actually going to run through various global statistics, kind of looking at where people are coming and going today, right? Okay. So this is where we're going to start bringing, a lot of our geography into the mix here, right? Like let's break out a little bit. So now this episode is all about your summer vacation, and the numbers we're going to run through aren't really exclusive to summer. I guess that's the caveat.
Okay. All right.
That said, we can say, because we have statistics to back this up, that travel in summer is predominantly when people do their travel, because we have a bunch of UN data that says that. So I just want to make that call out. We're going to be throwing numbers at you. That's going to be inclusive of the entire year. Just know that summer is going to have the bulk of that popular or that travel. And so
that's the high time.
I'm not breaking it out by those months. Mm-hmm. Right. and I already mentioned this earlier in the episode, even in Southern Hemisphere countries, the summer months tend to still see the peak, though they're not quite as pronounced. So although their winter months don't really see this, they also don't really see the same lull in travel as we do up here. This can likely be explained by the fact that people from the Northern Hemisphere, which is the most populous hemisphere, are still traveling to these countries when they have their summer break, right? So if we're here in summer in the United States, and let's say we want to go to Australia, we'd be traveling down there into their winter. Therefore, they would, I think that sort of props up their winter a little bit more, their winter travel. So they still get most of their travel in summer though. So Hunter, question for you.
Yes.
What country would you think is the most traveled country in the world as far as international tourism goes?
My first guess is France, because I know a lot of people go to Paris from around the world. But I also know that recently Japan has had a big upsurge in tourism. But I guess I would say France. Just, I'm going to throw that out there.
It is France.
Oh,
it
wow.
absolutely is France.
Okay.
Well, so there's going to be a little bit of caveat with our data here. So all of our data is coming from the United Nations, which tracks global travel. This also means that our country data is coming from 2022. So 2022 means that it's probably still impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic a little bit. We have global numbers for 2023. We don't have country numbers, individual country numbers, I guess. I don't know how UN's breaking out their data. So as of 2022, France was the top traveled country with almost 80 million international visitors that year, which is a lot. I mean, that's more than their population.
Right.
This would be followed by Spain.
Okay.
At number 2 with about 72 million. And then the United States at about 51 million.
Wow.
And then just to go through the top 10 list would be Turkey, Italy, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Germany, Greece, and then Austria. Wow. So this would be our top 10 for 2022 again. Now, Japan very well could likely today be up there. But I think in 2022, it still wasn't a highly traveled country due to the COVID-19 pandemic.
Well, you couldn't go in 2022. So that's maybe part of, I mean, it was only recently that you've been able to travel to Japan. And I think because of that, there's this huge swell in people who've gone to visit. We were there last year, and the line to get, through immigration took like over an hour at least. It was an hour and a half, just tons and tons of people waiting just to check in legally to the country.
Wow. Incredible. Well, so Hunter, as you look at this list that I just read, or as I just said, did you notice any trend there? Did you pick up on anything?
Europe?
Yes, exactly.
Is that the trend you're looking for here? The geographical?
I mean, it is
grouping
dominated by Europe. Yeah. Like Europe is far and away the most traveled continent, region, whatever you want to call it, in the world. And so this is interesting because it shows that I think the allure of an area of the world that held so much of the world's wealth and built so much of its cities and infrastructure off of that wealth for a long time, and it's still kind of reaping the rewards of that wealth, which is, I mean, it's just an interesting thing to think about. I don't necessarily have like a criticism over it. It's just something to like, wow, that's kind of still like sort of paying dividends for them, I think.
Well, I think that Europeans travel a lot, and probably Europeans somewhat commonly travel to other places in Europe. That's international travel. So, I mean, that's not all of it, of course.
No, it wouldn't be counted. So somebody going from Germany to Italy would not be counted as international travel because you need to.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the UN's only counting international travel because they're getting their numbers from passport checks. Right. It's very specific. And if you go from Germany to Italy, you're not, like if you're a German person, you're going into Italy, you're not going through a passport check.
But if you go to Switzerland, you do.
But if you go to Switzerland, you do. Yes. Right. Yeah. So I guess within the European Union, and you're not doing those.
And the UK now as well, since they Brexited.
That's true. Yeah.
So I said within the European Union, it's the free movement of people, and so maybe they're not counting that. But yeah, I get the distinction.
Right. But yes, to your point, yes, if you're going from, I mean, there's a number of countries down there, but yeah, Switzerland to any of the other countries or anybody going to Switzerland, you're going through customs, that's getting counted. Same with the UK now. Potentially, I can't remember a couple, maybe Norway up in Scandinavia. I
Mhm.
can't remember what their status is in terms of, because there's the European Union. There's also the Schengen zone, which is
Right.
similar but not the same as the European Union. So I
Right. I
don't
think
know.
not
It's a
all
little
the countries of the European Union belong to the Schengen Agreement, and there may be a few who aren't in the European Union who do participate in that. But that's the Schengen Agreement is the idea that you can travel from different European countries without having to be passport controlled.
right. Now, there's a caveat with our data, Hunter. There are countries that aren't included. So
Okay.
UN just doesn't have the numbers for them. So, for example, China, we don't have numbers for international tourism into China.
And that's a big one because
It's a big one.
yeah.
It's a big one. I still don't. I'm not sure if they would still hit. I'm not sure if they would still hit the international travel to make it into the top 10. Maybe they would. I don't know.
Do the
To me, it
statistics
seems
include people who are from China who visit other places, or is that not part of it as well?
we are going to get into domestic tourism in a little bit.
No, but I mean, so
Yeah.
like somebody from China going to France or something like that.
Oh yeah, that would be included.
Okay.
Yeah. So because it's being counted at right. So France is basically reporting this is how many people
Right.
we had go through our customs.
Okay.
Right. They're saying we had 79 million people come through in 2022
Okay.
from other places. So they would be counted absolutely.
Okay.
Unless what wouldn't be counted would be some sort of travel that's undocumented, that somebody sneaks in. These kinds of things.
Right. Well, and the
That
other
would
thing that maybe makes this is the point of entry as well, because once you go to France, you can go to Spain and Italy and
Yep.
various places, and then those statistics aren't captured really because the point of entry was the
Yep.
place you flew into. Yeah.
Exactly. So they do get a little muddied, especially for a place like Europe.
Mhm.
You can't really track it. And this is also where we get to. So we're going to talk about domestic travel in just a second, but let me finish up my thought here on international travel. So in total, as of 2023, so we have 2023 numbers, around 1.3 billion people traveled from their home country to another country.
Wow.
Again, we don't even have numbers for China and a number of countries as well. That's a lot of international travel. That's a lot of, yeah, it's incredible. So this is still down, if you can believe it, from the 2019 high of almost 1.5 billion people.
Mm-hmm.
But 2024 is shaping up to be a monster year for travel. And so, especially with things like the Summer Olympics in Paris, I imagine the France's numbers are going to be boosted a little bit more. We'll see. But it's really quite incredible how many people do travel internationally. Of course, not everybody's going for pleasure. There's reasons, go back, help family with something, you're living as a migrant somewhere. Business travel is still a thing, although it's been diminished since the COVID-19 pandemic. So there are still other reasons for travel, but broadly, this is how many people are traveling. A lot of those are probably doing it for pleasure, and a lot of those people are probably doing it in the summer months, is what we can say. So now let's talk about domestic travel, because you were talking a little bit about that.
Yes.
So a question for you. Do you want to take a guess at who might have the most domestic travel?
So most vacationing within a country from people from that country. The United States, possibly?
The United States is number 2. They're not number 1. I don't know if you would get number 1 because it's a country that we don't have data for international travel for, but for some reason we do have it. UN does have it for domestic internet or domestic
China,
travel.
Yeah.
It's China. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it makes sense.
China,
there's a lot of people there.
Right. So China has, according to the United Nations, the most amount of domestic travel. Obviously, there's 1.4 billion people who travel within the country.
Mm-hmm.
This will be followed by the United States. We'll get to the full list here in a second. But there's a few things that I want to talk about with regards to domestic travel statistics, because it is something that's hard to quantify. And I'm not really sure how the UN is doing it. I think what they're doing is they're asking each individual country, and those countries are reporting back.
Right.
And so, for one, I would argue, or I would ask, what counts as a domestic travel tourism trip, right? So, Hunter, you drive up to Seattle, let's say.
That's right.
From Portland for a day, one day.
Right.
And then you return to Portland by the end of the day. Is that counted as a domestic tourism trip? And then how is that counted?
like for who's the person collecting this data, or is there an
I don't know.
organization? Oh yeah, right.
These are
This
the
is a
questions, right?
rhetorical question. I see.
It's a
Yeah,
rhetorical question. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
So
Well, I mean, I think it's still a trip. It's a short trip if you're just staying for the day, but that probably counts.
and I would argue it does count, but again, it's like nobody's tracking that, right? So like you're actually probably not counted, right? And that trip, like there's nobody at Seattle being like, click,
Right.
person from there's an Oregon license plate here, click. This so like this is sort of where it gets a little more squishy, right? Because say you're in China. China does have different rules, but they're probably still not actively counting everybody who's traveling from Beijing to Shanghai, on a train and asking every individual person, oh, are you here as a tourist to do some sightseeing? Right. This is where things get a little squishy.
Yeah. Some of the statistics, they must come from occupancy of hotels, now Airbnb type situations as well. But there's no way to record when people are going to stay with friends or family. That's
exactly
reported.
Exactly. Yeah. So there are some statistics. You can dive into like Oregon, for example, has a whole travel statistics page. You can sort of see that, and that's basically what they do. They track hotel stays. They do track plane trips, that kind of stuff. I think AAA, the American Automobile Association here in the United States, tracks road trips. I'm not sure how they do that and dive into their data. But all that's to say is this domestic travel statistics get very muddy very fast in a way that international travel statistics don't really. I mean, they get a little muddy, but there's a point of entry into most places, and that allows you to make a very solid count. To your point, Hunter, international travel can get a little muddy because you fly into Europe, for example, you fly into France, then you take a train to Spain, you're not being counted for Spain.
Right.
But still, it's a little bit more precise in that you can at least say Europe is getting this amount, X, Y, Z. So I wanted to talk about that before we get to the rest of the domestic travel statistics, because I think it just gets a little, there are things here that I'm like, I don't know if this is actually true or not. I don't know. I just think there's a lot that goes into this that I'm like, well, maybe. So China is number one.
There's limits to our ability to know certain things, and this is the best data that we have available. So this is sort of what we base our understanding on. But the reality of the situation is almost impossible to know.
Right. So China number one, we already talked about that, followed by the United States. China had something like 3 billion domestic travel trips.
Right. So this is multiple trips taken by, because there aren't,
Right. Again, and the United States was very high. I didn't break it out by numbers for this one because it seemed like, it just didn't seem, super, super relevant. But we'll go through the countries. So number 3 would be Indonesia, which I thought was interesting. Then Spain. And then Japan.
Okay.
And then Malawi, which I thought was very interesting that they were in the top 10.
Yeah.
So again, I think this is just showing that there's people tracking data differently. Then France, then South Korea, and then finally Australia.
Okay.
A noticeable absent from this list. Have you picked up on that? That you would assume would have a lot of domestic travel trips?
Other places in Europe, or is that what we're going for?
I would say it's the other really big, most populous country, which would be India.
Right. Yeah.
To me, it's shocking that India is not on this list. And again, I think it just shows to the limitations of our data.
Yeah,
right?
it might have to be a collection, because there's about as many people in India as there is in China, and there's transportation networks, and people, I'm sure, are going to different places. But you would, if we're looking at raw numbers, you would expect India to show up on the list.
Absolutely. So let's move on, because we've talked a lot about sort of where people are going, domestic tourism, international tourism. But of course, around all of this tourism industry that has, grown over the last few decades, it's also propped up a really large industry to support all these people moving around, right? So another question, Hunter, do you want to hazard a guess at which country is most dependent on tourism as a percentage of its annual GDP?
Okay, so it's corrected sort of for, it's not the largest amount, but largest percentage. Correct. The country, let's see.
I'll give you a hint.
Oh, good.
It is an island country.
It is.
I'm not sure if you're going to get it even with that hint, though, because there's a lot of island countries.
I know. I'm coming through my mental list of island countries right now. So my guess for the country that has the highest percentage of their GDP related to tourism is Tahiti, but that's part of France actually. So maybe that's not a good guess.
Well, so French Polynesia is up there.
It is. Okay.
So it is broken out a little bit differently. I mean, it's probably top 15.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and give you the answer because you could probably guess all day. And the answer is Aruba.
Aruba. I'm not sure would have come up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you would have. Aruba gets about 22% of their entire GDP from tourism, from the tourism industry. This would be followed by, well, Macau, which is, again, broken out from China.
Right.
And then the Bahamas, and then Fiji, and then Croatia. Croatia is far up there as well, which is always interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that. It's a place that I would really love to go and visit personally, but I did not expect it to have a high tourism
beautiful destination. I mean, these are all beautiful destinations, but I think
very beautiful.
Croatia holds a lot of appeal for, I think, people in Europe as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
The other big one that sort of makes the sort of top 20 list would be Mexico at almost 7% of its GDP, which I thought was pretty significant for a country that size.
Yeah.
So very impressive. France, Spain, United States, all of these countries that had the most amount of tourism, it's not on the top 20.
Right. So they've got so many other industries going on.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's just a lot more going on. Hunter, this has been a really fun exploration of all of the global statistics and everything. We could probably dive deeper and deeper and deeper. We could obviously go into each individual country's data, Airbnb's data. I mean, I don't know, Zillow probably has data on this. There's just a lot out there is what I'm saying. But we can't spend all day on this. So we're going to hit our very final ad break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about one specific country that has had an enormous impact relatively to its size on the summer vacation. So we will be right back. And we're back. This is the Geography is Everything podcast. We've been talking about all about your summer vacation or various summer vacations and tourism and travel around the world as we hit that integral part of the year. Today, on this sort of final part of our episode, we're going to tackle really just one country. And that country is going to be Iceland. Hunter, have you ever been to Iceland?
I have never been to Iceland.
It's kind of interesting because a lot of people have these days, and that's why we're going to talk all about it. What do you know about Iceland?
I know that the Iceland national soccer team did pretty well in the Euros, or competed in the Euros 4 years ago, and that brought a lot of attention to Iceland. I know it's not super heavily populated.
We're going to get to that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know tons.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Iceland. So, caveat here, way back when I first started doing stuff on YouTube, this was, when I was basically didn't really have a YouTube presence. I did actually make an entire video all about Iceland and why people travel there. So I guess listener, you can go crawl back.
Before you established your channel.
Well, I mean, it was the same channel. You can find it on my channel, but you can. It's just like one of my very first episodes. I think it has like 1,000 views or something like that. So like not very many. It's a pretty rough video, but people can go check it out if they like. I think it's fun. We're basically be covering the same topic, same kind of stuff today. So let's first talk a little bit about Iceland's geographic location, Hunter, because it really is kind of key to this story. How would you describe where Iceland is?
The North Atlantic?
Yeah, it's in the North Atlantic. It is, in a way, it's kind of about as close as in between North America and North America and Europe as you can get, without also being on the Greenland island. And that's going to factor in heavily into sort of today's sort of story about Iceland. So this exact location has really enabled what Iceland's been able to do, along with some sort of shrewd marketing that's sort of gone along with it. So let's get to some statistics because that's what we like to do here. As of 2022, Iceland had about 1.7 million visitors. Okay. That's not top 10 status, right? That's pretty far down the list.
But that's probably larger than their population.
Oh, it's way larger than their population. So let's put this into context, right? Because it's quite impressive. So in modern history, there really are only about 3 countries that dominate tourism year in, year out. It's always been about, it's always been about Spain. It's always been about France. It's always been about the United States.
Okay.
And there's good reasons for this, right? There's, these three countries have a unique combination of sort of cultural relevance in terms of sort of, what they're doing, natural beauty, right? National parks, that kind of stuff, the Alps, the Pyrenees, and sort of exciting cities, New York City, Paris, Barcelona, that drives people to them. None of this is surprising. Everybody's probably like, yes, we understand.
Right.
Iceland does not really seem to fall into this same sort of hierarchy. And that said, they still have been able to carve out a slice of this really large pie for themselves, disproportionate. So when we compare the total tourism of these countries with Iceland, they don't match up.
Right.
When we compare it based on their population, Iceland kind of blows them all out of the water. So to put this in perspective, Iceland is home to 382,000 people.
Yeah. Wow.
Which means for every one resident Icelander, they get over 4 tourists.
Wow.
That's a heavy ratio.
Yeah, it is.
The United States, for every 6 residents, every 6 Americans, I guess, we get 1 tourist. And so you can see how the scales tip. And that the same can be said for France. France gets, I think, 1.3 tourists for every 1 resident. Spain, a similar number. So you can see how how Iceland is definitely punching above its weight a little bit.
Per capita, sort of heads and tails above everybody else.
Exactly. And because Iceland is situated in this unique area in between the United States or North America and Europe, it does allow for a very convenient stopover location.
Yeah.
And this is something that Iceland has been very shrewd about marketing itself, but it didn't start in a vacuum. So to sort of figure out what the story is, how did Iceland figure this out? How did they start marketing this as a potential? We kind of have to go back to the 2000s. So Iceland, in the late 2000s, I should say. So Iceland was in pretty bad shape economically. A lot of places were. This was the time of the Great Recession, which I think we have an episode about as well. You can go check that out, right? Do we have an episode about the Great Recession, or did we do the Great Depression? I can't remember. Yeah, there's something out there for you. We've gotten to the point where we have too many episodes and we can't remember everything.
Not too many, but yeah, it's hard to keep them all straight.
So back in the late 2000s, Iceland's primary financial institutions went bankrupt. I don't know if you remember this, but it was actually kind of big news. Their currency was hitting rock bottom against the US dollar. So Iceland was getting relatively cheap to go to. And while this is normally terrible news for any country, and obviously it wasn't a fun time for people who were living in Iceland at the time, I'm sure, this did stoke the fires of opportunity within Iceland, because historically, like most Nordic countries, like most Scandinavian countries, like most European countries, it had been really expensive to travel to Iceland prior to this.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden it became more of a bargain, right? All of a sudden, like, hey, this is someplace to go to, because their currency was so cheap against the US dollar and the euro at this time as well. And so savvy travelers began to pick up on this sort of bargain and began traveling to Iceland in amounts that wasn't really seen prior to this. And so again, it's still a relatively niche audience, but they're still figuring it out. These are like, people who love to travel, love to go to places. Now they're seeing there's a bargain there. But while Iceland being so cheap was sort of an impetus for some savvy travelers, there was one really large event that literally put Iceland on the map in a way that Iceland had never been on the map for most people in the world. Do you know what event I'm talking about?
I'm not sure that I do.
So in 2010, the Icelandic volcano, man, I'm gonna mispronounce this. I did try to pronounce this correctly.
Yeah.
I think it's Eyjafjallajökull. Eyjafjallajökull erupted, which sent millions of pounds of ash into the atmosphere and grounded global travel between North America and Europe. And so people were stuck on one side or the other. There was, for a long period of time, there was just no travel going back and forth. Maybe some limited stuff, but it was just not happening.
Okay.
And this, people are pointing back to as saying, okay, there was a lot of confluence of events happening. Iceland was getting cheap. It's situated right in between Europe and North America, but people still didn't really know about where Iceland was. And so people looking back are like, oh, this really helped put it on the map. And now all of a sudden, people want to go see this thing. They want to see what grounded travel. They want to see what Iceland's all about. And so it really helped people identify with where Iceland was. And this all leads up to sort of the final nail in Iceland's tourism monument. I
Okay.
don't want to say coffin because that doesn't really
Right.
make sense, which is Iceland Air's incredibly savvy stopover flight program. So,
Right.
have you heard about this? Do you know what this is?
Well, I mean, they made it easy to fly through Iceland and stay for a few days, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So, it's a program, and I'm not sure. So, this was something that I remember seeing a lot of previous to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just not as in tune with sort of travel trends these days, even though I just pulled together this whole episode. I'm not looking at sort of what each individual airline's doing, I guess I should say. But it is or was a program where you could fly into Europe. It's primarily a North American to Europe sort of package. Stop in Reykjavik, which is the main city there in Iceland. For a night or two, you could see Iceland and its natural beauty, right? If you haven't been to Iceland, it is truly a spectacular country to see. It's very different from almost anything else you're going to be able to see. So go check it out, I guess is what I would say. And then you would continue on to your primary destination, be it London, be it Paris, be it, Germany, wherever. You could just keep on moving. And this created a system where mainland Europe's robust tourism base was funneled through Iceland first to a degree. And we obviously know that Europe has a massive tourism base, right? We ran through those numbers earlier. And so even just being able to carve out a little slice of that pie has been enormous for Iceland. It's been a huge boon to their economy. And so we have some numbers on that. In recent years, these are from the 2010s. I don't have post-pandemic numbers, unfortunately. But in recent years, Iceland has continued to be a major destination despite its currency rebounding. And the country is actually now quite expensive to go to. Just, so nobody's getting sticker shock if they listen to this podcast and they decide to go to Iceland. It is now pretty expensive to go.
Yeah.
But in 2010, the amount of people employed in Iceland's tourism industry was roughly 12,000 people, or about 4% of the population. So it was not nothing. It wasn't huge though. By 2018, that amount had swelled to over 30,000 people, or just about 9% of the population. Wow. So in 8 years, it grew by more than double.
Yep.
During that same period, the amount of money tourists spent increased from about $500 million annually into Iceland's coffers to over $3 billion. So people were spending more, right? Because you're also getting those travelers. We talked about this, prior to this, we were getting travelers who were going there, seeing it as a bargain, seeing all these kinds of things. So they were getting deals. So there wasn't that much money. There was more people going there, but the money still wasn't sort of keeping up.
Right.
As Iceland got more expensive, as more people came, people were spending more, a lot more money started flowing in. So for a small nation of around 380,000 people, smaller than most even moderately sized cities in America,
mm-hmm.
That's an incredible amount of money. In fact, I mathed it out. I did the math.
You did?
Yeah, broken out evenly, which of course it's not, because that's not how most things work. But
right.
If it were broken out evenly, each Icelander who lives there would get about $8,000 per person every single year just from tourism.
That's how it shakes out.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean that's a lot. That's a lot of money for each individual person. Yeah. And again, that would be every single person. So babies, not just working age people, but babies, right. Children, everybody, right? And that's really all there is to Iceland's incredible tourism story. I mean, I glossed over a lot, but we're also getting a little long here, and I don't want to keep everybody. I just thought it was a really fun way to sort of close out our episode, especially because I'm sure there's a lot of our listeners who might actually be doing this. They're like, oh yeah, on July 24th, I'm going to Iceland for a couple of days. And then,
well, they have this tourism board, as you mentioned earlier, I think, that have these very creative ads. And, you've probably seen some of these. And one of the hooks is people come to Iceland and then they won't leave. And so they send somebody to sort of follow them around to remind them that they're just on vacation. And then they turn around, that those people are gone already. So that they're creating this idea that this is a place that once you get there, you won't want to leave.
Right. And I definitely see the appeal to it. I've been to Iceland once. It was very beautiful.
Oh, you have been?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I stopped in Reykjavik only for a night. Although this was this was something different because this was a long time ago. Maybe there was part of a deal. It was a family vacation at the time. This was back when I was probably like 17.
Okay.
But I guess, no, this would have been way before this stopover.
Way before this new swell. Yeah.
Yeah. It was definitely before the swell. I'm not sure. They might have had stopover deals prior to this, but they really started able to marketing it and funneling it because I think it was, again, they were able to be put on the map in a way that they never were before. Iceland was kind of not thought about as even a European country until relatively recently. And now that's not to say Icelanders didn't consider themselves European.
Right.
Talking about the broader global perspective, because they are a little bit farther departed, right? And in a lot of ways, they would be analogous to almost like Alaska is to the United States, right? It's like if you look at a map of the United States, there's going to be the contiguous, and you're going to have a little box up in the corner,
right? The little
Alaska.
Inside. Yeah.
And it's sort of doing Alaska and Iceland, I think, a little dirty there, but yeah, that's the case. Yeah. Well, this has been a really fun episode, all about your summer vacation travel plans. If anybody out there is listening, and I did nail that you're going to Iceland on July 24th, let me know, because I think that'd be really fun fact that I'll share later.
Well, and then, the last thing we could say is that there's this new thing. It's not new, but it's a new name, the staycation, right? So because traveling is fun, traveling is exciting, but it's not always relaxing because there's a lot of details and you're going to new places. So some people are opting to stay at home for a staycation where all their stuff is and they just don't have to go to work or school or something like that. So that's another offshoot of this whole thing.
Yeah, I dig it. Maybe there's this might be a harder episode for us to do, but maybe there's a geography as your staycation episode.
We'll have to do some work on that one.
That might require some work. Okay. Well, Hunter, where can people find you around whatever?
Thanks, Jeff. I'm Hunter Shobi. I'm a professor of geography at Portland State University. I'm co-author of Portland is a Cultural Atlas and Upper Left Cities, a Cultural Atlas of San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle. And I'm co-host of this podcast, Geography is Everything.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Gibson. I'm also co-host of this podcast, Geography is Everything. You can find me over on YouTube. That's youtube.com/geography by Jeff. You can also find us over on Substack. That's geographyIsEverything.substack.com, where you can get more, well, it's not more content. You can just get this podcast there. It'll be delivered straight into your email box. Sort of a handy way to do that. Totally free. If you liked what you heard today, you enjoyed our conversation today on the summer vacation, please rate and review us, or like and subscribe to us on YouTube or on whatever app that exists out there, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. What are we doing next week, Hunter? Let's give people a little teaser here.
It's a little bit of an offshoot, I guess, of what we've been talking about today. We're talking about a country that does get a lot of tourism, I think, these days, and that country is Belize.
Oh, Belize. Okay. I think that'll be a very interesting story.
Yeah.
I don't really know all that much about Belize. It's not my episode. I'm not doing the research for it, so I'm excited to learn all about it. But what I can say is that I believe Belize, if I believe it, I'm sure that joke's been made 1,000 times. I believe that it's a predominantly English-speaking country because it was a English colony, right?
That's correct, right? Which makes it unlike a lot of places in Central America, but more similar in some ways to places in the Caribbean. So it's got this sort of mix of a lot of different cultures coming together. I've been there myself. It's a fascinating, beautiful place with great people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, come back and learn all about Belize. I'm sure it'll be fascinating. We love our place-based episodes. I think it really helps draw in people's certain imaginations who want to learn about those places. So this is your chance to learn all about the geography and culture and probably history of Belize. So I guess until then, we will see you next time.
Thanks for listening.